Hi guys, we have a very important article here from the New York Times, Friday, November 6, 2010. Scholars reconsidering Italy's treatment of Jews in the Nazi era. This is by Paul Vittelo. Italians took everything from Ursula Korn Selig's family during the World War II, including a hotel the family owned on the Riviera, and the money they carried after fleeing Germany's persecution of Jews in 1938. Italians also saved her family from almost certain death in Nazi concentration camps. Mrs. Selig said, hiding them in a succession of secret shelters in Italy between 1938 and 1944, often at the risk of the Italians' own lives. The two faces Italy displayed, so in other words, we see they have they took everything from her, but they saved her life. So we see there's like two faces. There's like a duality towards the Italian treatment of the Jews during this time. The two faces Italy displayed toward Jewish citizens and refugees just before and during World War II have become the focus of recent historical research that both undermines that country's wartime image as a nation of benign captors and rekindles memories of heroic Italian individuals. Mrs. Selig, 85, who has lived in Manhattan since 1950, offered her double-edged testimony after a panel discussion on the new scholarship at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park City on Wednesday evening, days before Jews commemorate Kristallnacht. So this was a few days before Kristallnacht of last year, of 2010. The night of deadly attacks by German Nazis in November 1938. The new findings contradict the conventional belief that Italians began to enforce anti-Semitic laws only after German troops occupied the country in 1943, and then reluctantly. In a spate of studies, many of them based on a little-publicized Italian government report commissioned in 1999, researchers have uncovered a vast wartime record detailing a systematic disenfranchisement of Italy's Jews beginning in the summer of 1938, shortly before the Kristallnacht attacks in November. That year, Mussolini's fascist government forbade Jewish children to attend public or private schools, ordered the dismissal of Jews from professorships in all universities, and banned Jews from the civil service and military, as well as the banking and insurance industries. Ilaria Pavan, a scholar at the Scuola Normale Superiore in Pisa, said a series of incrementally more onerous laws in 1939 and 1940 revoked peddlers' permits and shopkeepers' licenses and required Jewish owners of businesses as well as stock or bondholders to sell those assets to, quote, Aryans, unquote. Bank accounts were turned over to government authorities, ostensibly to prevent the transfer of money out of the country. There is little record of the sums involved in the confiscations and forced sales of Jewish-held property between 1938 and 1943, said Ms. Pavan, who was a member of the official government commission charged with investigating the anti-Semitic plundering. But between 1943 and 1945, when the Italian government was under the direct supervision of government overseers, the looting of property of Jewish Italian citizens and Jewish refugees who had fled to Italy in hopes of sanctuary, she said, totaled almost $1 billion in today's values. After the war, encouraged in part by Italy's American occupiers, Italians embraced a spirit of national reconciliation that, quote, allows the construction of a sanitized collective memory, unquote, end quote, said Alessandro Cassin, the publishing director of the Centro Primo Levi, a research institute in Manhattan that promotes the study of Italian Jewish history, and that organized the panel discussions. The whitewash was possible in part because, by comparison with the horrors inflicted by Nazi Germany, the Italian government was, quote, not as lethal, said Gori Schwartz, an adjunct professor at the University of Pisa. It did not sanction physical abuse of Jewish citizens, did not execute anyone in the internment camps established for Jews in southern Italy, and did not begin to send Jews to Nazi concentration camps until the German occupation in 1943, he said. Of the 45,000 Jews counted in Mussolini's census of 1938, about 8,000 died in Nazi camps. About 7,000 managed to flee. About 30,000 lived in hiding before being liberated by Allied troops, Mr. Schwartz said. One of those hiding was Mrs. Selig, who was among about 100 people in the audience for the discussion on Wednesday. Quote, "It is a very complex situation," she said when asked afterwards about her feelings toward wartime Italy and Italians. 13 years old when her family fled Berlin and settled in northern Italy in 1938, she said her experience in Italy over the next 8 years ran the spectrum from the despair of destitution to the exhilaration of freedom. Quote, "They took everything from us," she said. Quote, "My father and mother were quite wealthy when they arrived in Italy, but when they came to the United States after the war, he had to work as a night watchman and she had to work in the garment district. On the other hand," as she said during a question and answer period after the presentation, quote, "I would not be here if not for Italians." Quote, "An Italian woman hid me, an Italian priest put me in a convent where I wore a nun's habit, and an Italian boy risked his life to bring us food," she said. Harry Arlin, 83, an audience member who said his family was interned in an Italian camp for several years, also stood to describe his experiences, saying, quote, "If the Italians hadn't taken us to their camp, we would have been sent to the Germans' camp, and we would have been killed." Michael Sarafati, the author of several books on Italian fascist anti-Semitism, said a higher proportion of Italy's Jews survived the war than their counterparts in most other European countries. But Italian culpability for the persecution of Jews remains relatively unknown and largely unacknowledged by Italians. Professor Pravan said, people, quote, "People were made destitute, people were turned into ghostly nonentities in their own country," she said. This is also true. Here we have a picture of Harry Arlin, who survived an Italian concentration camp called Fermonti di Tarsia at his home in Huntington, New York. And here we have again Ursula Korn Selig, 85, who hid in secret shelters in Italy during the Holocaust in her Manhattan apartment with her dog Domani. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.